Welcome everyone to our Rooted webinar entitled Keeping Small Group Time on Track. I'm Chelsea Erickson. I'm the editor of youth ministry content for the Rooted blog, and I also serve as Rooted's director of publishing. And Rooted's mission, for those of you that might be new to our ministry, is to equip and empower churches and parents to faithfully disciple students toward lifelong faith in Jesus Christ. And by students, we specifically mean teenagers. We're always interested in younger and older kids, but we're really hyper-focused on teenagers. And we encourage all youth ministers to approach this goal of faithfully discipling students toward lifelong faith in Jesus from what we call the 5 pillars of youth ministry. So those are gospel centrality, theological depth through expository Bible teaching, relational discipleship, partnering with parents, and intergenerational integration. And our topic today really touches several of these pillars, as small groups represent kind of a key component of youth ministry. I think most of us would say at their heart, small groups are relational discipleship. It's a chance to, whether it's we ourselves as youth ministers, or if we have any lay leaders on the call, you experience this too, that this is a chance to really go deeper in relationships with kids. We also really want to hone in on the goal of gospel centrality today, because small groups are such a key way that we can just keep the gospel in front of kids every week as we meet together. So we encourage you to facilitate groups that will be theologically and biblically rich, as well as centered on the person and work of Christ and saturated in his grace. So On Track, in the title of the webinar today, really refers to the ways we try to kind of redirect random comments or distractions so that everyone can participate in a meaningful way, but also to the content that we choose to emphasize in our groups. So we're going to touch on all of those things, I hope, today. But before we get started, I want to introduce you to my good friends, Cindy Lee and Mark Rector. And between the two of them, they check off a lot of experiences with small groups, including leading students cross-culturally and in local church and parachurch ministry, serving on paid staff, as well as lay ministry roles, leading guys versus girls. And if you're familiar with Rooted, we really try to approach a variety of ministry topics from the perspectives of different contexts. This is really important to us. So I'm excited about all that these two bring to the table today and to our conversation. Later, there will be an opportunity for you also to chime in with your unique context. So first, let me just introduce these two with a little more detail. Cindy Lee is a longtime missionary to Southern China, an MDiv student at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and a mom of 3, including 2 teenagers. She serves on the teaching team for women's Bible study at her church in the Bay Area of California, and she meets with teenagers and single women for discipleship. Mark Rector serves as the associate minister at Mountain Brook Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. He's a dad to 3 young kids. And prior to his current role, he served both local church and parachurch youth ministry context for the past number of years. So welcome, you two. So glad to have you with us today. Thanks for joining.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to see both your faces. All right, well, let's kick it off. We know that small groups are one of those components of youth ministry that are just kind of our bread and butter as youth ministers or as lay leaders. And as we dive into this topic, though, it strikes me that it's one of those terms that's kind of become very like Christian term. So let's just start by defining, like, what do we really mean by a small group? What does it look like? What does a typical small group look like in a day in the life of youth ministry? And why have they become such a key feature in many youth groups? And Mark, I wonder if you could kick us off just talking about that a little bit.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, for sure, Chelsea. You nailed it. I mean, we use this term small group all the time. And, at some point it's like, okay, what do we actually mean by that? And I think there are a few common features of small groups, at least that I've had the privilege of being a part of and leading over the past several years. One is studying God's word, like God's word, and whatever kind of different form or shape that might take. But I mean, that's a central part of what I believe a small group is about. Having biblical teaching and gospel application from the word into the lives of students and into all people. So I think the word is central to a small group. But really a small group is more than that as well. Fellowship and like outreach, like fun games. Like a small group is, I think, a mix of all of these things together for the building up of the body of Christ. And I think particularly with students, small groups are a great way for growth to happen, for conversation, for discussion, for questions. And so when I think about small groups, I think maybe about those kind of key features and some combination of those things. But then also knowing too that I don't think there's a one size fits all kind of approach to a small group. I think knowing your context, knowing your students, all those different things play a really big role into what a healthy small group looks like. So.
Some of us may serve in contexts that are a little larger where we have a lot of students, and if we're only gathering with them in the larger group, we're really missing some of those relational opportunities that you talked about, or even opportunities for them to kind of enter into the learning of Bible study and of exploring questions that they might have theologically or in terms of apologetics. And it's really, maybe it's kind of become a cliche term, small groups, in youth ministry, because it's just, it works, but also I think it follows in the model of Jesus, right? Like he taught to the masses, but then he also took time with the 12 and with even a wider circle of disciples. Rebecca McLaughlin just published a great book this last year about the female disciples of Jesus. So that we know that there was even a wider circle too, but there was kind of these rings of influence. And so we just kind of know, like, to do the things that you're talking about, sometimes it requires a smaller group of people, right, to go deeper. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, with those things in mind, I wonder if each of you, and maybe Cindy, you could kick us off, but tell us a little bit about each of your past and current ministry settings. What have been some of the unique nuances to leading groups in those different contexts?
Sure. I forgot to mention in my email to you, Chelsea, that I was a high school teacher for like 8 years before China. And I totally forgot about that. It was like a previous life. But preparing for the seminar, I'm like, yes, I remember just, they would teach us in teaching credential school, how to deal with disruptions and how to be a good listener, how to accomplish a goal, despite of the disruptions we face in teaching. But just in the past, I have had experiences with teenagers in those ways. And then on the mission field, we always did small groups because it was always in a house church setting. And I feel like a lot of the questions the new believers throw our way are kind of young questions, maybe our teens would ask. And also they're not used to sitting around in a circle in a worship setting too. So a lot of that is just getting used to the format and just helping them along those ways. Has taken some skills. And then now we're back in the States. I just find myself really, the Gen Zers are so different in how they evaluate and comprehend things and how they come up with meaning. And I feel like a lot of that has put a lot of challenges on myself to really understand what I'm talking about and to be able to communicate that to them in a relevant way. But yeah, drawing on some of the skills in teaching how to deal with interruptions has been helpful for me when I have subbed for some of the groups here in my church. Yeah.
That's so good. I feel like that classroom management stuff is something that youth ministers often have to learn really on the fly. Like we don't necessarily get a class in it. So God bless the teachers that are in our ministries and can teach us some of those skills from their, classroom experience. Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Yeah. And Cindy, you're about teaching. So my wife is a teacher. And so, I will very frequently, ask her about, kind of group dynamics and handling those things. And she's been just an incredible, encourager and coach for me, talking about groups and how to handle people and all that. But I've had the opportunity to serve youth for several years. I served youth specifically in another local church here in the Birmingham area, leading small groups and doing all the typical things that a youth minister does. I've also had the privilege of serving in a parachurch ministry here in the Birmingham area as well. And really, this parachurch ministry is a community ministry. It's kind of based and focused in one little suburb right outside of Birmingham. And so it's really interesting. You have students from a bunch of different churches, from a bunch of different traditions. You have just several like unchurched and dechurched students as well. But part of the way that this ministry helps reach all students is through coaching. So I actually coached middle school football for 2 years. And that was kind of the way that I helped lead these guys. They would come to football practice in the afternoon, and then like that very next morning they'd show up for a Bible study, and here's Coach Rector, and he's leading the Bible study. So that was really cool. And there are just a lot of great things and just aspects of how that parachurch ministry kind of operates even now. And then currently at my current role as associate minister, I teach on Sunday mornings, and will also help our student minister and our student interns just with teaching and leading small groups during the week as well. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
And I do think sometimes small groups, as you both mentioned, can be more of a comfortable spot for a teenager who's not familiar with the gospel, maybe not super comfortable in a church setting, to enter in. So it's really neat that both of you have that in your background, and maybe something we can continue to think about today. It makes me think of my husband's experience growing up in Wheaton, Illinois, which, similar. We got some planes flying overhead today, guys. But my husband grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, which is very church context, kind of similar to the Bible Belt, really, in a lot of ways. But had a really missional kind of youth group that he was a part of in his home church. And they, every week in small group, he had a great group of guys he met with, and their leader would always leave an empty chair, which, kind of reminds me of like Elijah or something, like waiting for Elijah. But they would talk about, every week at small group, they would talk about who needed to fill the empty chair, like which of their friends wasn't there that should be there, that they should invite. And I love that, because that's so much more, I think, comfortable for a kid to enter in to a group with their friends or with a small group leader that they know from coaching, than it is to come to like a big service or a huge program of some kind. Just, I think the hospitality of that is really a beautiful thing that we can offer. So this would be a great point in the call. Our participants, if you all want to chime in, we would love to get to know you a little better. You could write in the chat and just tell us a little bit about your context. Because we're recording today, we won't share your last names, but we'd maybe call out your first name and where you're serving and what your small group context looks like at some point. So if you want to do that, we would welcome just getting to know you a little bit and getting to just kind of celebrate some of the different contexts represented here. You could tell us about, what's different in terms of geography or ethnicity or church tradition. And we would really love to hear you share your experience. So think about maybe chiming in. And as we continue, let's just think about what are some of the, kind of staying with the hospitality theme, actually, like how do you build youth or a small group culture that's warm and friendly? You both have had lots of experiences, and I would just love to hear what are some of the marks of that? How do you do that effectively as either a staff or lay leader? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, I'd say particularly as I was thinking about kind of my parachurch context, I and even coaching 150 something boys, 7th and 8th grade boys at football. I mean, that's a lot of boys to try to reach out to. Like ideally I would love for them to come to a Bible study on Wednesday or Thursday morning. But really, so I kind of knew early on that look, if I want to show hospitality, extend hospitality, there's kind of naturally this core group, I think, that starts in a small group or starts in some kind of small group Bible study. And so you kind of know you've got those, and in my case, boys to kind of to deal with right there. And then it's equipping them. It's equipping them to invite that friend, to talk about, hey, this is what we talked about. This is what we learned at small group. And so I think there could be a temptation for small group leaders to think that they've got to try to do this all themselves, when in reality, part of what they're doing to begin with, right, is trying to equip and build up, growing and mature Christian young men and young ladies. So I kind of saw reaching out as, that is definitely a primary job that I have, but like, it's only going to be effective, if I can kind of ingrain that that mindset and that desire in really kind of that core group of students. So.
Yeah, I would say I noticed that's a struggle for teens to kind of put themselves in the other person's shoes of somebody who is new. And so I think it kind of starts with us. If we could gather, especially some of the leaders, and to kind of ask them, what does it feel like? What do you think it feels like to be a new person here? And then to get them thinking, and then to brainstorm together. Sometimes in the past, I've heard leaders taking their group of adult leaders taking their group of teen leaders to visit another church together, and then to kind of embody, like, what was it like for you? What were some of the things that was, really easy for you to feel like part of the body? What are some things that are missing? And then they will come back together and brainstorm together. So I think that it would start with you, and then kind of imparting that vision onto a group of leaders who could implement that on a weekly basis. And food always helps, like after a small group meeting, to just kind of give them a reason to hang around, kind of make that time a little bit more like a family. And that's one thing we learned in China, is after meetings over, the best thing is the talk afterwards, which is with cookies and water, even, that they can kind of get to know one another and just joke around. So I think those are the things to, like, that's the practical steps we can take. But then there's also the vision that you have to cast intentionally. And sometimes I've taken the girls that disciple, like on a Sunday morning, and I'm like, I want to meet at least one new person today. Will you come with me? And to have them go, oh, this is actually not just a Wednesday night thing. This is a family of believers that we can get to know, to kind of shorten the gap, especially if we go to a larger church. So.
To visit, but that's like to help them experience what is it like to be the new person. Such a good idea. And then, to take them along with you on things, and help them to kind of grow in a vision for including others. One of the things we've been doing a lot on the blog lately is we've had this series about creating a culture of belonging, because there was a new study put out by Springtide Research that Lifeway covered. There's a great article. I'll put it in the show notes when we post this on the web, but on YouTube. But it talked about how belonging to anything really, like, makes teenagers less at risk for some of the anxiety and depression that we see, and some of the risky behaviors. And so it was just like I think for us on the blog, it felt like a call to action of like, wow, we need to really be reminding our youth worker friends that this is a significant part of our gospel ministry, is just to help create this culture where teenagers really feel like they belong, and where they do belong. And who better to offer that than the body of Christ, right? So I love all the ideas you both shared. Just want to chime in on the food thing. I think that is so critical, probably more so in other cultures even than our US culture. But I think in teenage culture, food is a big thing for like hanging, we have to be a little careful how we handle it in terms of those who may have some disordered eating practices or be struggling. But wow, I mean, I just think that there's a reason that youth ministries use pizza a lot, right? It's because there's something about having that slice in your hand or whatever it is that you're eating together that just makes you feel a little more at ease and a little more cozy. So I don't know, in the ministry that I've served most recently as a youth minister, we found really that middle schoolers couldn't always handle it during discussion group. So our practice was kind of to have snack after, like you were saying, Cindy. I think sometimes for high schoolers, it can be really effective to eat during small group. A lot like to kind of vet it group by group, but a lot of them are mature enough to handle, having small group over a meal or, having their hot chocolate and snack while they're talking together. And that actually can, I think, facilitate community and discussion in a really great way. So yeah, just love what both of you shared. Well, so, in order to create that culture of hospitality, we really need leaders who know how to do it, and leaders who know how to lead gospel-centered content as well. It's kind of a big job. I mean, we kind of feel like when we're recruiting, sometimes it's like, oh, wow, this is a lot. We're really asking a lot of people. So I'd be just curious, how do you each think about pairing people to lead together? How do you think about, what are the marks of a good small group leader? What are the tools you need to equip them with? Just anything you want to share on that theme, because I think for a lot of us, I'm looking at who's here today, a lot of these are paid youth workers, this is their vocational role. We've invited people who are lay leaders to jump on too. So we'll get to some more of the tips of the trade for everybody. But yeah, when you're thinking about who should lead these groups, how do you kind of vet that? And how do you think about pairing people up to lead together?
I guess I'll start us off. I would just look for people, of course, who loves youths, and everybody should love youths, but there are some who not just love the youth, but they are really interested to get to know the youth. And I was reading the other day why Dr. Fauci, when he did this hand slap to his face when during one of the Trump conferences, and that meme became so popular among the Gen Zers, and The Atlantic wrote an article on why the Gen Zers loved Dr. Fauci's slap to the face, because they said that he was just so human. And I think our teens really, the Gen Zers especially, want to relate to adults who are real and authentic and can lead, but at the same time share their vulnerabilities. But also, are very knowledgeable about what the subject matter that they're leading. So I would say somebody who's very authentic, who cares about the teens, and a good listener, know how to summarize a statement and how to reflect back to what the teens are saying is a skill. A conversational skills is a much needed skill nowadays. And I think just to show them another side of, during this hour, you're so valued and seen, and this relationship between you and I are not transactional or thin. And that really adds value to the teens' lives. So I think just beyond just a love for God's word, a love for teenagers in a way that they seek to know them and what makes the gospel good news to them in their current context. So it takes, on the backside, I know it's an adult who spends a lot of time reading, perhaps on the Gen Zers, what they're like. And then on the front end, the teens, it's just somebody who's really genuine and who is a good listener. So I think those are the people you would want to be looking for, and perhaps sometimes asking feedback from your leaders, like who are some of the adults that you guys just want to get to know, and maybe approaching those adults to ask them to take a leadership role in the group.
For sure. I mean, I think having that desire first and foremost is key. I mean, I'll be honest, very rarely have if someone, if like a lay leader or volunteer has come to me and said, "Hey, I'm interested in being a part of youth ministry or helping lead a small group." Like, honestly, very rarely have I just and actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I have. I've just flat out said no. Like, you can't do that. I mean, it's always, okay, that's awesome. But I think as with a lot of things, lay leaders and volunteers, small group leaders, they want some kind of plan moving forward. And so I know, especially now in my role, where I'm kind of planning out curriculum and scope and sequence and those different things, is getting that into the hands of small group leaders and saying, hey, this is what we're doing this winter and spring semester. Here's why we're doing it. And, kind of coaching them through just some very basics of kind of what we're going through. And then saying, hey, always, feel free if you have any questions or comments or, whatever. I'm always here to help out and to coach you. So, but I think in terms of what an effective small group leader is like, I mean, again, I think a small group leader is dynamic in the sense that, again, it's not just a teacher. It's not just, not just like another person to hang out with, right? But it's kind of all of these things together. And so I think an effective leader kind of realizes the different aspects of their role, and they faithfully step into these different things that they do try to relate and to connect with the students that they're leading, and to extend hospitality and to try to bring others into the group as well. So I do think it's dynamic in that sense. I've also seen just from small group leading as well that as planned and organized and structured as so many of us often want to be, small group leading takes an incredible amount of patience and flexibility as well, and the ability to be patient and flexible. Maybe you've kind of got an idea of what a particular small group is going to look like one night, and then it doesn't really quite go to plan. I can't tell you how many times I've been there over the course of leading small groups, but so being flexible, not chasing a rabbit down a hole just for the sake of doing so, but knowing, hey, this could lead somewhere. Like that, I can kind of tell that what this student is going through or asking or wanting to talk about, like this is worth the 5 or 6 minutes, let's say, of kind of going off and doing that as well. So flexibility is key, especially with students, because you don't know what they're going to ask. You don't know what part of passage they're going to want to talk about. And so kind of being able to meet them where they are and continue to point them to the truth of the gospel wherever they are. So.
That, I think as vocational youth ministers, we're often kind of feel a little bit caught between two things, at least two things, probably more. But on the one hand, we're the gatekeepers for our ministries, right? And so we have to make sure that the people that we're going to place in students' lives as small group leaders or any other kind of leader are going to be safe, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all of those ways. And we have some content on the website and on YouTube about that, about, how do we keep kids safe and how do we be good gatekeepers? But then we also feel caught because we need people to do this work with us, right? We realize that we can't the only way we can multiply ourselves and our time and our physical presence and our spiritual availability is to recruit others to serve with us. So if you serve in a youth ministry that's more than 5 kids, you actually, even if you serve in a youth ministry that's 5 kids, I think you need a second. You need somebody to be in it with you, to be teaming up. But then especially as your youth ministry grows from there, you need more leaders to be able to do this kind of small group ministry. So we're always kind of caught between needing more people. I've never met a youth ministry that said, we have all the people we need, we're good. They're always kind of in that space of trying to recruit. And especially for this model of small groups where we want to break down the large group and allow kids to have a more intimate experience, studying the word, meeting together, growing in the grace of the gospel. So it's tricky. It's a lot. And I don't know if you all would agree with this, but the way that I used to say it when I was recruiting people is that really what we're looking for is pretty simple. We want people who love Jesus, are following him and growing in him themselves. And then people who are interested and excited to bring teenagers along in that with them and to grow together. So I think it can sometimes feel, especially maybe to our older folks in our congregations or our spheres of influence, it can feel really intimidating because they're like, who is this iGen or Gen Z? Like what's their deal? I don't know what a meme is. I don't know what TikTok is. How am I going to relate? And I really valued having older people on our teams that became kind of surrogate grandparents, but they were sometimes the hardest to recruit because even if they felt the desire to do it, they felt sort of stymied by this idea that I don't know what they're going through. I'm not going to have anything to say. And so that was kind of the line I would often use was just, if you love teenagers and you love Jesus, even if you don't feel like you know everything that they're going through, everything to say, if you have an interest to help them grow along with you, then you're the kind of person that we want, and then obviously you mentioned, Mark, there's a lot of training. And I think, you shared this too, Cindy, but just a lot of ongoing training to share with them the vision for like, where are we headed as a youth ministry? What are we trying to impart? What's the purpose of a small group? But that, I think it really starts there with loving Jesus and being willing to come alongside a teenager and just be interested, as you said, Cindy, in who they are and what they're going through. And kids know, I mean, they are so good at detecting whether we are there for that reason or another, they have their radar up. What is it they say? Middle schoolers are asking, do you like me? And high schoolers kind of start to flip that to, do I like you? And so I don't know, I've found over the years that sometimes it's most effective actually to have small group leaders that start with kids in middle school and then keep going, all the way through high school, because there's already at that time when teenagers are starting to be like, do I think you're legit? Do I think you're the real deal? They've already got the relationship established as they're going through that critical transition. So that's just one little tip. It doesn't work in every case or in every ministry, but we started to move a little more toward that model. So yeah, well, you touched, I think you both touched on this a little bit, but my next question has to do with kind of the ways that small groups can go wrong. So even though 99% of youth ministries probably utilize small groups in some way, they can also be notoriously difficult to manage. And it can be hard to know, like you were saying, Mark, when to follow the tangent or when to redirect it. When to kind of encourage the over talker to give space for others or to draw out the under talker, and how to do that in a gracious way. So tell us about, this is, I think both paid and lay youth workers can really relate to this. If you're leading a small group, you've had it go wrong in some way. So what are some of those hiccups and how can we address them?
Yeah, I think that, there's always, each student is different. And that's what makes small group ministry unique, fun, and challenging. I'm sure we've all dealt with the student who is just not paying attention and just purposely, for whatever reason, just trying to distract others. They're just not engaged. They don't really care to engage. I've definitely encountered my fair share of those students over the years. There's also, at least I've had students who, do want to try to go down all these different rabbit holes, and they want to go off on these tangents, and they want to ask questions that aren't particularly related to whatever we're trying to discuss or talk about. And so that can be challenging as well. But I don't know, honestly, one of the more challenging things for me, and just in thinking about like types of students and maybe how they are disruptions, is for the students who just seem bored. Like they just don't want to be there. Like you can just, look at their face, just like their body language, like they just look bored. And, mom or dad made them come. All they wanted was the free pizza. And then now you've got to sit down and talk about the Bible for 20 minutes or whatever it is. It's just like, that honestly is the most challenging, because it's like at some point, like with the previous two, I think you can kind of recognize that there's something more like going on there. And then like your role as a leader or minister is to kind of dig in and to see what's going on. But I think that's a lot harder to do when you've got that student that just seems bored or like doesn't want to be there. Like how do you meet them? And that doesn't, at least maybe outwardly, it doesn't seem like a disruption maybe, but like your group will be more fruitful, at least that I've seen. Like the more engagement, the more people are paying attention, wanting to ask a question, willing to read scripture, like in your group. So those are kind of the three big types of kind of distracted students or whatever that I've seen. So I just throw that out there.
Mm-hmm. I have this little acronym that I use even with my own kids and even while teaching, because I love acronyms to help me kind of categorize my thoughts. And I call it just DIY. Like D is for disrespect. Like, okay, something was said. Now, was that disrespectful in any way or defiant? And then I feel like those things, okay, well, I need to address that right away, or it will ruin our time together, right? And that rarely happens. And then the second category is the one I have the most trouble with. I just call it impulse or / immaturity. Like just the hands are everywhere and they're touching each other. And there's just the bodies are, they can't contain their bodies to one spot. And what do you do then? And I've often don't know what to do on those occasions. Like, okay, you're lying on Sally again. You're braiding her hair again. And do you say, okay, can we just focus and regroup? Could be simple as that. Or sometimes I get super annoyed because it's happened, 5 times in the past 10 minutes. So that is hard for me for sure. And then the why is for just youth. Like sometimes it's not that, because the impulse stuff, I feel like if you remind them, they should be able to control it. They should be able to regroup. But sometimes it's just, they're just young. Maybe an outburst. That's just part of growing up, and they haven't mastered their bodies just so. And, I think about Eutychus, who just fell out the window when Paul was talking. Like that was a huge disruption to what was happening. But is that disrespectful or impulse? No, I think it said he was young and he fell asleep. And Paul dealt with that, right? The most amazing way. So I feel like sometimes when something happens for me to kind of quickly go, which one is it? Kind of helps me to not take it personal and then kind of regroup the whole group and manage it better. Yeah.
Can you say those 3 again? It was D was for
D's for disrespect or defiance. Those you do have to address right away. You can pull them aside or you can address it in the group, depending on the degree of the defiance. And then the I is for immaturity or impulse control. And those, you can just help them to, focus back and give them clear direction. Like, okay, let's all sit together. Let's go on question number 2 together. And then Y is for just being young. Maybe they cracked a joke or they say, bruh, just way too many times. That's kind of, what they say nowadays. I'm not going to correct that. That's cute. That's who they are. You got to laugh with that, right? So the Y is for just youth. So it's D for disrespect, I for impulse control, and Y for just youthfulness.
That's helpful.
Well, we're getting some awesome questions in the Q&A. So I kind of want to move us there pretty quickly, but I did want to just take a beat here because we value so much at Rooted, just getting the gospel in front of kids, getting it into their minds and hearts every opportunity that we can. So let me just ask one more question and we'll move to Q&A and some interaction with our participants today. But how do you all think about structuring a group and or choosing content for that group? And how do you make sure, whether it's yourself or leaders that you're overseeing, that comes around to talking about Jesus and his life, death, resurrection in our place, his work on behalf of teenagers so that they don't have to perform. They know that they're justified through faith in him. I just think that's so important. And everything we've talked about today is really building to the point that we can communicate that truth. So I'd love to hear how you think about that. And then we'll turn to participants a little bit too.
Yeah. So I think, in terms of kind of like content, I think like it definitely helps to have, curriculum. I mean, that I think is a really good thing. It's why Rooted does curriculum, right? I mean, like having that kind of plan and structure, I think is really, really good. And again, that kind of goes along with, I think, especially for lay leaders who are leading small groups as well, that I think that gives them a sense of kind of the known, of comfort and security of like, hey, here's what we're doing. Like I can bank on the fact that each week, hey, we're going through Philippians. So we've got Philippians 1 through 13, or and then got the next section of Philippians. So yeah, I definitely curriculum is great, but again too, in terms of kind of some of the more topical aspects that and discussions that come up in small group too, I think teenagers in particular, like at least the ones that I've been around, they really jump at the opportunity to talk about particular topics, and oftentimes that's where we might get, or at least that I've gotten more discussion, those types of things. But so I write a good amount of our Sunday school lessons each Sunday, and I think any good curriculum out there, like you've got to have that gospel connection, and so putting that gospel connection into like each lesson, and like knowing beforehand, hey, this is how this particular topic, this is how this particular passage connects to Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is huge. And you're right, Chelsea, like the gospel has to continue just being in front of students, because that's the way that they're going to, store it in their hearts and minds, and the ways that they'll grow as followers of Jesus. So.
Over. So yeah. Thanks for that, Mark. It's really good. How about for you, Cindy? Anything you think about?
For me, I feel like a lot of my experiences has been with the girls, the young girls. And I'm always wondering, like, what are the questions they're asking when it comes to reading scripture? And I feel like, at least for the girls that I've interacted with, even my own daughters, part of it is, how does this even relate to my life? Like if they're studying the Shema, like, okay. One of the questions I asked them was, do you even know how to pronounce this word? They're like, Deuteronomy. It's a strange thing to say, but it's just a simple thing to, and then I'm like, how does this relate to you? And sometimes even asking them the questions they don't know that they have, because they're not probably thinking deeply about it on a Wednesday night at 8:00. And you have to do a lot of that work for them. And then saying, this is actually your history, if it's the Shema. And then they'll say, well, how is this my history? This has nothing to do with me. This is thousands of years ago. And then connecting that perhaps to, is not your physical history, but spiritually, this is where you are coming from. These are your ancestors. And I think that drawing some of those connections for them, and we think deeply about scripture, kind of starts them to be interested in loving the Lord with their minds. And also just drawing on, I feel like a lot of the cultural questions they're asking is no longer like, do I have to be good? It's, are we free? And to just always drawing back to how does this, either the Shema or First Peter, how does this say that Jesus has freed you from whatever the bondages are, the cultural heads on you, whether it's how you look or your grades or your identity and this and that. And then kind of help them think through, you are not your looks nor your grades, then you are what Christ says you are. Just kind of connects all those huge gaps for them and the dots for them. So I feel like if we've done that week in, week out, maybe, at the end of the year, they kind of learn to think along those ways about scripture. But a lot of it is modeling and asking the questions and asking interesting ones that they would like to engage in.
Always kind of walk that line of like, what's appropriate transparency for us, right? Obviously, you don't want to share a struggle that you're still in the midst of processing, that you haven't processed with other adults in your life and maybe in counseling or in pastoral care worked through. But it is really good to be able to share yourself. Like, this is the way that Jesus is addressing my identity and like making it about him instead of about these other things that I'm tempted to put it in, or this is the way that this passage really applies to me. After we've studied it and we've seen the original context and we've worked through some of those kind of inductive Bible study questions, like, here's the challenge that I sense God giving me as an adult. I think that those things are just super helpful for our kids to hear from adults that they value and trust. It makes a big difference when they see the gospel lens affecting all of our life. Lets them know that it's relevant for them as well. So yeah, thanks for everything you all shared about that. I'll do a shameless plug. Rooted has great small group curriculum on Rooted Reservoir, and we'd love for you to check that out. Really, really detailed sort of exegesis from some of our friends who have studied different books of the Bible in depth. And then they give you relevant questions to be asking your students. If you have middle schoolers, it'll probably be more content than you can use. Or if you have a shorter small group time, it may be actually more content that you can use. I've found that to be really helpful because sometimes I think when you buy curriculum, you're having to add a lot to it and, fill in what is the gospel connection here. And this curriculum on Rooted Reservoir has done all of that so that as you're studying it yourself, there are lots of great kind of answers and things to think about that you can draw out in your small group time. So I highly recommend that you check that out. And I'm just a big fan of inductive Bible study in general. I think if you can get kids doing that and teaching them how to observe, then interpret, then apply, rather than sometimes we want to jump straight to the application. And that's not actually being faithful to the text. But if we can show them how to go through those initial steps of observing and interpreting, and then get to the application and say, okay, how does this point us to the gospel? How does this point us to the work that Jesus has completed on our behalf, that we're not able to obey the law on our own. Like, we need him. I think we'll set them up really well when we do that, to be able to study the word for a lifetime, to be able to follow Jesus for a lifetime. So the Rooted curriculum does that. You can also do that through just using the practices of inductive Bible study. And I think it's a great way to study with kids and to get the gospel into every single lesson. So we had a few questions here. We also had, thank you for those of you that chimed in to tell us your context. It looks like we've got, even in the same area of Chattanooga, Tennessee, a larger established church that's a, kind of a partner with Rooted, Signal Mountain Pres, that has 200 to 250 students weekly and divides up into small groups one night. And then we've got a new church plant, which is so exciting, also there in Chattanooga, with 30 kids in the youth group. So it's just fun to see the diversity of, I think whether you're a small church or big church, a lot of churches are doing small groups and finding creative ways to do that. And we value all of you and your experiences. A great question here from our friend Joy, who says, it seems like, especially since the pandemic, teenagers have become more accustomed to being attentive and quiet while someone is speaking, because they were doing so much Zoom learning for a while. Maybe the social skills have been kind of just changed, right? They maybe feel less ready to talk in group. And then on the other hand, there's also some decorum, maybe as generations are going by, that that could be missing, where I think, some of us observe kids might be a little less respectful than in some cases than they were even a number of years ago, just because of the way our culture is changing and the things that they're exposed to. So I don't know if you all could chime in on that, but how do we kind of, I love that Joy asked, we don't want to be rule heavy, right? We want to be grace filled, but we also do need to have some kind of common courtesy together when we're in small groups. So how do you think about kind of setting that culture or helping other leaders to set that culture?
I love that, Joy, that you said that too, that you realize rule heavy is not the way to go. And especially with Gen Zers, like that doesn't work at all anymore anyways. But when I saw this question, my first gut reaction was, I would just be honest with the kids. If you're leading a small group of kids, or if you're the pastor of that big group, and to have an honest conversation with all your leaders and just present the challenge and say, hey, everyone, like we are all coming off Zoom. We were all fatigued and now we're in person. And I'm just noticing, I'm struggling with this too, that we tend to either get too energetic or we're really low energy. So, but the goal is we want everyone to participate and to listen to each other, have a full conversation. Do you guys see the same problem? And just have a time where they can kind of go evaluate together. Like, oh yeah, it doesn't feel good when I'm interrupted all the time. And then kind of almost train the kids again. And I do this at the dinner table with my kids all the time. I'm like, hey, your sister wasn't finished and you just cut in with basketball and she was still talking about her band stuff, so and then just kind of remind them and train them, and to just be real patient in the process, to have a big cultural goal together that we want everyone to feel valued and seen and heard. And then in the process, train them to get to that goal together. But to have an honest conversation first, so they are all on the same page with you. You're using the same vocabulary. Maybe you can write down some values together as a group. Like, we don't want to interrupt. And if we do interrupt, it's okay if you remind us with maybe a code word or just a hand gesture. Just establish some commonality together when you're back in person again. I think those type of conversations would be helpful. And then when you're in person together, to just keep training the kids and then congratulate them when they're actually hitting those goals. So yeah, that's some of my ideas for now.
Yeah. I think setting the tone too is like leaders, small group leaders, set the tone by the terms of like, their attitude, like their energy level, the way that they listen and that they respect. And I think students, they feed off that, like they see that. And I think generally speaking, maybe majority of the time, like I think they notice that and they're kind of, or at least in some sense reflect like the tone that a small group leader is taking on as well. Just an interesting story, even from yesterday for me. So I was leading our Sunday morning Bible study, and we had one of our seventh grade students, and he was like turned around talking to another student in the middle of our Sunday morning Bible study, and he's this particular student. He's a great kid. He's so nice. He's so sweet, friendly. So many people like him, and all this, and I have a good relationship with this student. So I figured this tactic could work or could be good in this moment. But I said, hey, so-and-so, what do you think about this? We're talking about being salt and light. We're talking about Matthew 5 yesterday. And he kind of looked at for a second, and he's a little panicked, like, oh my gosh, like Mark just, he just pointed me out. And I was like, but I tried to help him along, like, hey, here's what we were talking about. We asked this question, and then, I started to kind of prompt him a little bit. Hey, here's some thoughts. And then he kind of completed it. And I noticed like that kind of just got the group right back on track. Like he was able to kind of re-engage. I think he felt somewhat reaffirmed, because as I started to prompt him a little bit, he was able to jump back in and talk and answer. And then we just kept going on like nothing was the matter. And that student, was great the rest of the time. So I know that could be a rare case, but I've found, especially with the relational work, like done in other parts, in other areas of ministry and student ministry, like that was kind of the prime opportunity to be able to do that and to help our group along. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
I think sometimes, even without meaning to, when we call students out in the group, it can feel sort of shaming to them. But like the kind of the gentle way of like, it's almost like being like, hey, we really want you to be involved in this conversation with us. And, I know you weren't really listening, but here's what you need to know to be able to give us your insight, which we value, so there's like an affirmation to that. That's really in the right relationship. Really awesome.
Yeah. You definitely have to be careful with it for sure. I mean, that's not something that you can do even all the time. It's like, okay, I think I got this card. I can play it right now.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that kind of will, set the tone for the rest of the group, for the rest of the time that you have together. So
that's really winsome. That's, that's one, I don't want to cut you off, Mark, if there's more you wanted to say, but that reminds me of something, a lesson. I add this to the list of lessons I learned in sorority life that have come to be very useful in youth ministry. And it's actually kind of a long list. So, depending on where you live in the country, that might resonate more than other places. It's kind of contextual. But I remember I was leading recruitment for my sorority my junior year in college. And I'm a weird person who like loved sorority recruitment on the other side of it. Like when you get to meet all the potential new members and kind of usher them through the process, I thought it was a blast. So one of my pledge sisters had another woman in the sorority had kind of the opposite attitude about it. She did not love it. And she was a strong personality and a strong leader that people really liked, really listened to. And she was kind of bringing the morale down. It was just one of those situations where her attitude was affecting other people. And in a moment of inspiration, I truly do think it was the Holy Spirit. I gave her a leadership role, and it turned around, not just her participation, but the entire week of recruitment was turned around, because all of a sudden she was engaged. She was excited to participate. She knew what she was doing and what she could contribute. And I've thought of that so many times in small group situations where that the kid who's kind of like taking things off track or maybe being disrespectful actually has a lot of leadership gifts. And I think sometimes if we can give them a job that fits their gifts, if we can see the potential in them and the ways that God has gifted them to live in this world and to lead others, and lean into that with them, it really can get everything back on track in such a beautiful way. And it can help others to grow and to learn. So I think that became one of my best tools in my toolbox for lots of situations in youth ministry, but maybe especially in the context of small groups. And it kind of leads us into actually this last question. We're kind of at the end of our time, but our friend Tim has a great question about how to incorporate kids with special needs into small groups and how to make sure that we're ministering to them. And I would actually say something really similar. You all may have other ideas, but I would say my biggest idea about that, and the thing I've seen be most effective as I've just been learning how to do that better, is to give kids with special needs a role that fits them, meets them where they're at. So I think of one dear student that I had for the past 7 years, who's just a great kid, a kind kid, and had some challenges participating in small groups. But when he had a job to do, even if it was as simple as passing out the Bibles for, our group discussion, or, even just to like go around and say hi to each person as they arrived, some different jobs like that met him where he was cognitively and emotionally, it changed his whole participation in the group. And it helped others to see his value as an image bearer of God, that even if he wasn't participating, going deep into the discussion questions with us, he was also there to be a part of our community and to know Jesus better. And so I think there was just like a dignifying piece of that, of like, this is a person who has wonderful gifts and skills and personality traits to bring into our group. And we want to highlight those. And give him a way to belong, just like everybody else. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I think I've seen be effective. Sometimes having an adult buddy can help as well, depending on the student's needs. But I don't know what else you all would say to that, but that just came to mind for me in response to Tim's question.
Yeah. I think even something as simple as like in a small group and you're sitting in a particular way, like that particular student sitting by, another couple students, like either because that your special needs student, really wants to be friends with, these other two people, or maybe is asked to sit next to them or something like that. Like that means a lot. And I mean, that something even as little as that, I don't think even should be overlooked. But so my brother is on the autism spectrum. And so, grew up in youth group, and, just seeing him, I think there's a really special way that students with special needs can just can be a part of group and just feel, I think they can feel so they feel so excited about being in group and being included in a way, I think that, students maybe without some of those needs do as well. So I don't know. I think I think there's so much to celebrate in that, that is a picture of the kingdom, and how Jesus meets us where we are and calls all of us, despite who we are, where we've been, what we're going through, to come and follow him. And so, yeah, I'll just add that as well. But that I think is really important.
Yeah, I love that, guys. I was actually really looking forward to you guys answering this question. Those are great.
Yes, to chime in on that. I think I'm remembering that you maybe have some experience in this area, either in your ministry or elsewhere in life. So if you have ideas for us, I think this is a place where, again, we don't go to school as youth ministers. Most of us don't get teacher training, right? We don't go to school for education. And so I think the more we can lean on people who have actual SPED experience in the classroom or in homes or doing therapy of some kind, that can be so helpful to just team up with them and ask them to give you advice about how to deal with certain situations or how to think about incorporating kids and families that are affected by special needs. It's just, I found that was something I always had to learn very much on the job and lean on other resources. So yeah, if you have any advice for us, if anybody else on the call has experience and can chime in on that, I think we're all learners in that regard. And Mark, just so appreciate you sharing your personal experience too. It's really great. Sweet testimony. Well, y'all, we want to honor your time. We said this call would be an hour and we're almost 10 minutes over. It has been so good to be with you all today. We're thankful for our live participants and for all of you who will watch the call after the fact. But Mark and Cindy, thank you so much to both of you just for sharing your wealth of wisdom and experience with us. This has been delightful, and I hope that it's been helpful.